Montana Territory, 1883. The letter came to the post office in Miles City the same day the snow melted off the last fence post on the southern edge of town. And by dusk, Nevena Stokes had agreed to marry a man she had never met. She read the letter 3 times at the counter, the worn wood sticky under her palms. The name at the bottom, Thomas Gray, meant nothing to her, not really. He was a rancher in Wyoming Territory, had 2 children, and needed a steady woman to help raise them. His handwriting was clean, purposeful. He said he did not expect love, only decency and shared duty. He had heard of her through the widow of a preacher who had passed through Miles City a year ago. Nevena folded the letter in half and stared out the dusty window at the open land beyond the street. She had no family left. Her father had died of fever the summer before, and the boarding house where she worked as a cook had no more room for her since the railroad men stopped coming through. The options left to her were few, and this letter, this stranger, offered something that looked like survival. She wrote back that night, said yes. She boarded a stage headed south 2 weeks later, holding a satchel with 2 dresses, a Bible, and a cracked photograph of her mother. She wore her best boots and a blue shawl that had belonged to her grandmother. She was 23 and no one came to see her off. The journey took 6 days through wide skies and hard country. When she stepped down in a town called Buffalo, her spine ached from the travel. She looked around, expecting a man with a sign or a wagon. Instead, a girl no older than 10 approached her with a squint and a frown. "You Nevena?" the girl asked. "I am." The child crossed her arms. "I am Flora. Pa could not come. He is out at the south pasture with the cattle." Nevena stared at her. The girl's brown hair was tangled, her cheeks windburned. Behind her stood a tall, silent boy, maybe 8, who said nothing. "Is this your brother?" Nevena asked gently. "His name is Finn. He does not talk much." Nevena crouched to meet his eyes. "That is all right." Flora turned and marched toward a waiting wagon. "Come on then, Pa will be back tonight." The ride out to the homestead was long and quiet. The children did not ask questions. The boy stared out at the land with a kind of old sadness, and the girl drove the horses like it was something she had done every day of her life. The ranch was modest. A 2-room cabin with a porch, a barn, a chicken coop. The inside was clean but worn, the kind of place built by someone with more grit than comfort. Nevena set her satchel down near the hearth and looked around. No sign of a woman's touch, no curtains, no softness. Flora kicked a log into the fire. "You can sleep in Pa's room. He said he'll sleep in the barn till you 2 are married." Nevena blinked. "And when will that be?" "Soon, I reckon." Flora shrugged. "He says you are to have a say in it." That night, the man who had written her finally came home. He stepped into the cabin with the weight of the trail on his shoulders. He was tall, built like a man who had fought for every acre of land he owned. His beard was short, his face sun-darkened, and his eyes, green, unexpectedly settled on her with quiet study. "You must be Nevena," he said. She stood. "I am. You are Thomas." He nodded, removed his hat. "I am sorry I could not meet you at the station. The cattle broke through the eastern fence." She lifted her chin. "Your children met me. They were brave." He looked toward the bedroom door where Finn's small figure had appeared. "They had to be." He did not touch her, did not smile, but he offered her a mug of coffee and sat across from her. "I want to be honest," he said after a long silence. "I wrote those letters because I need help. This land, these children, it is too much alone. But I will not force you to marry me." Nevena wrapped her hands around the mug. "I came because I had nothing keeping me in Montana. I came because I wanted a life." Thomas nodded. "We will not rush it. You will have your own room. You can leave any time." She looked into his eyes. "And the children?" His voice softened. "They are mine, but I do not know how to be a mother and a father both." She understood that too well. Over the next week, Nevena rose before dawn to help with chores. She cooked breakfast, mended shirts, taught Finn how to read simple words. She braided Flora's hair and learned the rhythms of the ranch. Thomas was always nearby, but never in her way. He watched her sometimes, quiet, thoughtful. One morning, she found him mending a saddle under the cottonwood out front. His hands were rough, his sleeves rolled. He looked up when she walked over with a tin cup of water. Thank you, he said, accepting it. She sat beside him on the grass. You do not talk much, he smiled faintly. Neither do you. They sat in silence a while. Why did your wife leave? She asked finally. He looked out toward the hills. She did not. She died birthing Finn. Nevena's stomach turned. I am sorry, he nodded once. I cannot give you love, Nevena. I do not know if I have it left in me, but I can give you honesty, respect, a home. She looked at her hands. I did not come here for love, but I did hope. Maybe, he turned to her then, really looked. You deserve a hand you have actually held, he said, voice low but firm, not just a promise on paper. She looked at his hand, calloused and strong, resting near hers. I am not afraid of hard work, Thomas, she said. But I do not want to feel like just another chore on your list. You are not, he said quickly. You never were. He reached out then, not bold, just steady, and took her hand in his. She did not pull away. That night before bed, Flora whispered, You like him, do you not? Nevena smiled. I think I do. And before she could say more, Finn crept over and leaned against her side. He did not say a word, just rested his head on her arm. Nevena closed her eyes and let herself breathe. Out on the porch, Thomas watched the stars. He heard the children laugh, heard Nevena's voice, soft and kind. He closed his eyes and for the first time in years let himself hope. By the third week, the thaw gave way to soft earth and pale green shoots pressing through the soil behind the barn. Nevena found herself waking earlier, stepping out barefoot before the rooster called, just to feel the wet grass between her toes. The silence in the morning wasn't empty, it hummed with presence. She pulled water from the well, fed the hens, and listened for the faint rhythm of Thomas splitting wood somewhere out of sight. Inside, Finn had begun to sit at the table even when he wasn't prompted. He still didn't speak, but he watched her now, eyes following the way she folded linens or poured cornmeal into a pot. Flora had started bringing home wildflowers, leaves still damp from the creek, and laying them in a cracked jar on the mantel. Nevena never asked her to, and Flora never commented on it. One afternoon, while the cattle grazed far out in the western field and the wind held the scent of distant rain, Nevena walked out to the fence line with a basket of boiled eggs and rye bread. She found Thomas knee-deep in a ditch, laying down new wire, his shirt clinging to his back with sweat and the weight of labor. Thought you might want something to eat, she said, setting the basket down on a flat stone. He climbed out slow, wiping his hands on his trousers before crouching beside her. She handed him a slice of bread and watched the way his fingers closed around it, intentional, like everything he did. Thank you, he said, voice low. She sat beside him, knees tucked under her skirt. Do you ever miss the army? He chewed slowly, then shook his head. I miss knowing what to do next, but not the killing. I imagine it stays with you, it does, but quieter now. They sat without talking for a while, a hawk circled high above, its shadow coasting over the grass. My mother taught me to sew by firelight, she said, suddenly unsure why she'd spoken. She said a good hem could hold a life together. Thomas looked at her, green eyes unreadable. She sounded like someone who knew about holding things together. Nevena smoothed her skirt. She buried 3 children before I was born. He didn't offer pity, just respect. I never thought I'd be in Wyoming, she said after a time, but I don't feel lost here. He set the crust of bread down on the stone. You've been here less than a month, and my children already look at you like you hung the moon. I haven't done anything but keep them warm and fed. That's more than what they had before. She turned to him. What about you, Thomas? What about me? Do you feel like you've had enough time to grieve? He didn't answer right away. He reached for the wire he'd been working on, twisting it slowly between his palms. I think grief stopped being a thing I carried, it's just the shape I walk in now. Nevena didn't try to answer that. She only reached over and took the wire from his hands, setting it aside. You don't have to be only what you've survived, she said, barely more than a whisper. He looked at her then, really looked. Not guarded, not weighed by duty. Just a man beside a woman in the quiet hush of a spring afternoon, seeing her for what she was. You keep saying things I don't know how to answer, he said. You don't have to, she replied. Just don't walk away from them. He didn't. That night, as she tied back her hair and folded the children's clothes, she found a small wooden box tucked beneath the bed frame. Inside were scraps of ribbon, a hand-carved horse no longer whole, and a faded apron with a stitched hem. She wrapped them back in cloth and left the box where she'd found it. Later, as she carried a kettle of hot water out to the porch, she found Thomas sitting with his elbows on his knees, staring out at the edge of the property. "I found her things," she said quietly. He nodded. "I couldn't bring myself to burn them." "You shouldn't." He turned slightly toward her. "I didn't ask you here to erase her. I didn't come here to replace anyone." She set the kettle down and sat beside him, not touching, just near. "I'm not looking for beginnings that pretend nothing came before," she murmured. "I only want a place that's honest." His shoulders eased. "You might be the only honest thing that's come across this land in years." The wind picked up, rustling the tall grass. Inside, the children's laughter drifted faintly through the walls. Thomas reached over, slow and sure, and touched her hand. Not to claim, only to acknowledge. "I don't know what comes next," he said. "I do," she replied gently. "We just keep showing up for each other." And for the first time, he smiled, not with ease, but with the kind of softness that came from letting something new begin. 3 days after the last frost, Nevena found herself kneeling in the vegetable bed behind the cabin, dark soil packed beneath her fingernails and the sun warm against the back of her neck. She had coaxed rows of beans into shallow furrows and was working her way toward the carrots when she heard the soft creak of the porch boards. "Flora's asking if you know how to dye cloth," Thomas said, stepping down from the porch with a slow gait. "She found an old shift of hers with holes and wants to turn it into something for Finn." Nevena brushed soil from her palms. "If she can find walnut husks or elderberries, I can show her." He crouched beside her, the knees of his trousers dusted from work. "You always know how to make use of things." She glanced sideways at him. "I was raised to find value in what others overlook." He rested an elbow on his knee. "You don't look like something overlooked." She let the silence hold between them. A breeze stirred the hem of her apron and carried the scent of pine sap from the hills beyond the pasture. "I've been thinking," he said, not looking at her, "about the two of us." Nevena pressed a seed into the earth. "All right. I want to marry you before summer comes. But not just because I need help or the children like you, or because you showed up when I asked." She stilled. "I want to because when I see you out here planting, stitching, sitting quiet with Finn, I feel like maybe this place can be more than just what's left after loss." Nevena sat back on her heels. "I wasn't sure if you'd ever say something like that out loud." He rubbed a hand across his jaw. "I'm not used to naming things I care about. Seemed like each time I did, they got taken from me." She wiped her hands on her skirt. "I'm not going anywhere, Thomas," he nodded, voice quiet. "I know that now." In the distance, Flora's voice rang out something about a chicken loose near the creek, and Thomas stood, offering his hand. She took it. They didn't let go right away. That evening, Nevena took Flora to the edge of the woods to gather walnut husks. As they walked, Flora picked up a feather and tucked it behind Nevena's ear. "You look like you belong here now," Flora said. "It's kind of you to say." "It's not kindness," Flora replied. "It's just true." In the cabin that night, Nevena found Thomas carving something small at the table. He didn't hide it when she approached. It was a button, round and smooth, made from antler, notched carefully around the edge. "For your apron," he said, setting it in her palm. She traced its grooves with her thumb. "You made this?" "I've been working on it a while." She looked at him across the lamplight. "You're not a man who does things without reason." "No," he said, "and I don't give things I don't mean to keep." Nevena closed her fingers around the button. "Then I'll sew it where it won't come loose." Later, as she settled into bed, she turned the button over once more before setting it on the windowsill. Outside, the wind shifted, warm now, moving west to east. The land was changing. She could feel it in the bones of the house, in the steadiness of Thomas's footsteps across the porch, in the way Finn had taken to following her into the barn without needing to be asked. In the deep quiet, she whispered, "I'm ready, Thomas." From the other room, his voice came, steady as the ground beneath them. "Then we'll begin." The wedding was held beneath the cottonwood tree at the edge of the pasture, where the land opened wide toward the bighorns. No preacher came. Only Thomas, Nevena, and the two children stood beneath the branches, the sound of creek water threading through the grass beyond them. The sun sat high and clear, and the wind carried the faint scent of sage. Thomas had shaved that morning, the lines of his jaw clean for the first time since her arrival. His shirt was pressed, collar straight, and he held a plain silver ring carved narrow enough to fit a woman's hand. Flora stood beside Nevena, holding a bundle of wild chamomile tied with twine. "Do you want to say anything?" Thomas asked, voice quiet but certain. Nevena looked up at him, her hands steady. "Only that I came here with nothing promised, and now I want nothing more than what we build from here." Thomas nodded once and took her hand. "Then I'll give you everything I have and everything I can grow." He slid the ring onto her finger and Flora handed her the flowers. Finn stepped forward and laid a stone at their feet, smooth, dark, and flat. It wasn't explained, but Nevena understood, something to mark the moment. Something that wouldn't blow away. They ate cornbread and smoked trout on the porch that night, and Nevena wore her grandmother's shawl though the air was warm. Thomas carved her name into the lintel above the door. No ceremony, just the sound of the blade moving through wood, and the children watching silently from the step. Later, after the dishes were washed and the kitchen darkened, Nevena stepped into the room that had once been his alone. The bed was freshly made and a sprig of rabbit brush lay on the pillow. He stood beside the window, sleeves rolled, watching the lanterns flicker against the barn. "You're sure?" he asked. "I wouldn't be here if I wasn't." He turned to her, hands loose at his sides. "I've known how to mend fences, break a colt, survive a winter with nothing but jerky and grit, but I don't know how to say what this means." "You don't have to say it," she said. "You've been showing me since the first morning." He crossed the room slowly, every step measured, and laid his palm against her cheek. She leaned into it, her eyes closed. His hand was warm, a little rough, and she didn't flinch. "You deserve a hand you've actually held," he said, voice low. She opened her eyes. "Then don't let go." He didn't. They lay quiet in the bed, the room wrapped in stillness. Thomas's breathing anchored her, deep and unhurried. She traced the line of his collarbone, not to claim, only to learn. He let her. In the weeks that followed, the land came into bloom. Wild geese returned to the creek, and the hens began laying without coaxing. Finn took to sitting beside Thomas in the barn, watching every movement as he fixed the harness or brushed down the mare. Flora started a journal with scraps of paper and the stub of a pencil, writing down bird calls and the way the clouds looked before a storm. One evening, as they walked the fence line together, Nevena stopped and pointed to a patch of yellow lupine growing wild near the rocks. "When I was a girl, my mother said those meant new beginnings." Thomas crouched to touch the petals. "You believe in that kind of thing?" "I didn't, but now, I think maybe I do." He stood and took her hand, brushing his thumb over the silver ring. "I don't want to forget what came before," he said, "but I don't want to live inside it anymore either." She looked up at him, the brim of his hat shadowing his eyes. "Then we'll keep walking forward, together," and they did. Back toward the house, where the windows glowed with firelight and the children's voices drifted through the open door. The wind picked up behind them, but it was warm now, not sharp. And the path ahead, though still dirt and stone, no longer felt so lonely beneath their steps. By mid-June, the rains had softened the trails enough that the wagon wheels cut clean through to clay, and the cattle grazed belly deep in sweetgrass. The days were long and slow, filled with labor that demanded attention but left room for quiet glances across the yard, for hands brushing when passing tools, for learning the shape of each other's steadiness. Nevena now kept a ledger in the bottom drawer of the kitchen table, where she tracked the chickens laying patterns and the weight of flour left in the barrel. She'd begun teaching Flora how to measure by feel, how a pinch of salt should rest in the crook between thumb and forefinger, how to judge the heat of the stove by the sound of water dropped on the iron plate. One afternoon, Thomas returned from town with a parcel wrapped in oilcloth. He set it on the table without comment, but his eyes flicked toward her as she untied the string. Inside was a bolt of calico dark red with a pattern of small white flowers. She ran her fingers over the fabric. "You didn't have to." I know, he said, removing his hat. I wanted to. She folded it carefully. It'll make a fine Sunday dress. He leaned against the doorframe. You haven't taken a day to rest since you got here. I rest when I'm sewing. His voice was low. Then I'm glad I gave you something worth cutting. That evening, while the children gathered wild plums near the creek, she sat on the porch steps hemming the fabric. Thomas came out with a tin cup and sat beside her, not speaking at first. After a while, he said, I've been thinking of building on, a room off the back with a window that looks toward the hills. She didn't look up. For what purpose? For whatever you'd want, a place for sewing or quiet. She tied off a stitch. You already gave me quiet. He looked down at his hands. I want to give you space to dream. She turned to him then. What are yours, Thomas? He hesitated. I never let myself have many. You could start. He studied her face for a long moment. I'd like to see Finn read a full page without stumbling. I'd like Flora to ride out with me, not just help in the kitchen, and I'd like to grow old with you with no part of me wondering if I deserve it. Nevena set her needle down. You don't have to earn peace. You just have to let it in. He reached for her hand. You make it easier to believe that. Later that week, a neighbor rode in from the east, a man named Merritt who'd helped Thomas settle the southern boundary years ago. He brought a young cow for trade and news that a late snow up near Sheridan had killed off half a herd. Thomas turned to Nevena after Merritt left. He asked how I ended up with a woman like you. She folded her arms. What did you tell him? That I didn't end up with you, I chose you. And you chose me? Nevena smiled. That's the only kind of belonging that matters. Summer deepened. The children tanned under the sun and came home smelling of horses and creek water. Finn still rarely spoke, but he'd taken to humming while he worked, and sometimes Nevena caught him watching her lips when she read aloud from the old hymnal. Flora began asking questions about the plants Nevena used for teas, how to dry them, how to tell one leaf from another. She wrote everything down in her journal with a purpose that made Nevena's chest ache. One evening, after supper had been cleared and the lantern was lit low, Thomas pulled a folded map from the drawer and spread it across the table. I've been marking the places we mended fence, added troughs. I want the children to understand the land's shape, not just its labor. Nevena ran her fingers along the lines. You've made something lasting here. He touched the corner of the map. It's not just mine anymore. That night, as they lay folded into each other beneath the open window, he whispered, I never imagined I'd feel safe again. She pressed her hand to his chest. You are. Autumn arrived with a hush. The fields turned gold, the air sharpened. Nevena planted late onions and turned the last of the plums into preserves. The new room Thomas built stood ready, small and square, with a shuttered window and a polished wood floor. She moved her sewing box there, and a chair, and a single shelf for her grandmother's Bible and the ledgers. One afternoon, she found a note tucked beneath the scissors, a scrap of paper folded tight, written in a careful hand. Thank you for choosing us. Flora Nevena held it to her heart and wept. By the time snowfall kissed the edges of the roof, Finn could read aloud without pause. Flora began stitching her own apron. Thomas carved a cradle from pine, though no one spoke of it, yet not aloud. Nevena's hands had found their rhythm in the soil, in the fabric, in the curve of her husband's back after a long day. They sat together one night, fire low, the room still. Nevena leaned into Thomas's side, her head resting just below his shoulder. I used to think survival was the best I could hope for, she said. He kissed the top of her head. And now, she looked up at him, eyes sure. Now I know better. They lived the years that followed with full hands and quiet joy. Seasons turned and the land gave what it could. The children grew into their strength. The house weathered storms but held firm. And at the heart of it all, Thomas and Nevena moved through each day as partners rooted, enduring, and wholly chosen. Their love didn't ask for songs or declarations. It showed itself in mended shirts, in the way he reached for her hand at dusk, in how she saved the first jar of jam for him each year. In the steady truth of two people who had known loss and built something whole anyway. And when gray crept into their hair and the porch steps creaked louder beneath their feet, they still rose each morning side by side, with nothing left to prove, only everything left to give.